Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. I want to start by saying their names, because that's what this is all about. Like many people, I've followed this case from day one, but I've stayed silent until now. And to be honest, there was a long period of time when I was avoiding any content relating to this case. Because with a gag order in place, the speculation that was occurring was ridiculous. This was another case like the Delphi case where there was so much polarisation over whether or not Bryan Kohberger was guilty. From the sidelines, I observed as harsh reality started this movement of Bryan is innocent, something that soon got followed by other creators and took on a life of its own. He even attacked Kaylee Goncalves' father repeatedly on his channel for speaking out, because as far as harsh reality was concerned, Bryan was innocent, and how dare Kaylee's father speak out against this innocent guy. I stopped watching harsh reality when his channel became a pro-Kohberger channel, because for me, when the news first broke that Bryan was arrested, my thoughts were, this is a huge case. They're not going to get it wrong. They're not going to find a patsy to arrest, because they're going to be looking for true justice, and they're not going to make an arrest until they know they've got a rock-solid case. But apparently a lot of people didn't believe that. Of course, we had the same approach from the defence team as the Delphi defence team, and that is continuous motions, continuous filings that were designed to sway public opinion, and they did. So with more and more people determined to attack anyone who suggested that Bryan Kohberger was guilty, I chose to stay silent. I chose to stay away from this case. So today, those of us who've been sitting here silently are in one way vindicated. Bryan Kohberger has accepted guilt. He's made a plea bargain. He's pled guilty to all 4 counts, and in return he gets to avoid the death penalty. So why doesn't this feel like a good thing? Surely this is justice, right? Bryan Kohberger is never going to be released. He can never do this again. But it just feels wrong. So in this video I'm going to look at that and see what conclusion I come to. Is this justice? Kohberger has said he's guilty. Is that what justice is all about? Or is justice about seeing this man lose his own life in return for the 4 lives that he took? Here in Australia, there's no alternative. We haven't had a death penalty here since the 60s. So if someone is convicted here, then they get life imprisonment. But the thing is, in Australia, because our justice system is so toothless, life imprisonment doesn't really mean that, because they can get parole. I believe that the minimum period now before they can get parole is 20 years. But for someone in their 20s who does a crime like this and they get 20 years, well, geez, if you get out in your 40s, you've still got a lot of your life to live. Unlike the person who's no longer here. And I mentioned this in another video. There was a case in Tasmania of a girl, Amanda Carter, I believe her name was. And she went missing after being out partying with friends. Her friends left her at a taxi rank. She was going to get a taxi home. She was safe. She vanished. In the end, the taxi driver, Wayne Highland, was convicted over her death. He served 13 years, that is all. So, compared to Australian justice, knowing that Kohberger can never ever be released is at least a step up. But is it really justice? I'm going to start with part of the statement made by the Goncalves family, and then I'm going to take us back to 2.5 years ago, to that moment when we all found out about this case. So this was posted a few hours ago. Probably a few more than that by the time you watch this. It is true, we are beyond furious at the state of Idaho. They have failed us. Please give us some time. This was very unexpected. We appreciate all your love and support. Hashtag heartbroken. Hashtag Kaylee Jade forever. So, with that in mind, let's take a step back to November 2022.
Now we do want to get right to some breaking news this morning out of Moscow, as classes are canceled for the University of Idaho today following the deaths of 4 students.
Nicole Hernandez live in Moscow right now. Nicole, you've been there for an hour or so now. What are you hearing from police this morning?
So, Tim Channing, what we know right now is that police do still have this house here blocked off with crime tape, investigating here. We have one person also kind of manning the scene, making sure nobody messes with the area. But what we know is yesterday, this house right here is where police found 4 bodies. And later that day, University of Idaho confirmed that they were U of I students there. So take a look at this breakdown here of the timeline that we have of how things happened. About 1 p.m., we heard reports of a murder investigation, or homicide investigation near the college campus. An hour later, the school put out an alert on social media. It said Moscow PD is investigating a homicide on King Road. They asked the community to stay away from the area and shelter in place as a precaution. Around 3 in the afternoon, Crime 2 arrived in Moscow. Neighbors said most people living in this area are part of U of I Greek life or are students. At around 5 in the evening, the Moscow Police Department confirmed they had found 4 people dead. But it wasn't until late that night that they confirmed the victims were students. The University of Idaho also said Moscow police do not think there's any active threat at the moment as they continue their investigation. And again, classes are canceled today for University of Idaho students. They will resume classes tomorrow. In Moscow, Nicole Hernandez, Crime 2 News.
Now, last night, the University of Idaho released a statement. President Scott Green says, in part, an event of this magnitude can understandably have significant impacts on those left behind. As vandals, we must come together and lift each other up. He also is letting students know that there are several support options available, including drop-in counseling.
Well, we will continue to follow this developing story here on Up with Krem. You can also find the latest information on our website, krem.com, and inside the Krem 2 app.
You know, it started with that sense of utter disbelief. How could this happen? What happened? And then as details came out and we found out how violent their deaths were, then there was that sense of anger and the need for justice. And then Kohberger was arrested. And initially, everyone was glad. They felt that the right guy had been arrested. And then, like I said, this one channel, Harsh Reality, began pushing that Kohberger was innocent, and other channels started getting on board. And then, of course, you had his defence team filing one thing after the next to try and sway public opinion. And we're fast approaching trial, and still the Kohberger supporters continued to attack Kaylee's family for speaking out, to attack people who believed that Kohberger was guilty, and to attack any suggestion of actual evidence, to say that the evidence was flawed, to say that there was some sort of corruption in the area, and that they were just trying to get a quick arrest to satisfy the university. And as with the Delphi case, these people who were pro-Kohberger would gaslight anyone who tried to suggest that he might have been guilty. So other people kept quiet. So now we have Kohberger saying, I'm going to admit guilt. I'm going to go into court on Wednesday, and I'm going to enter a plea of guilty in return for a life sentence. So we saw a brief comment from Kaylee's family. Let's look at the full release that their family has made. So this is slightly squished up a bit, so I know it's going to be hard for many of you to read, so I will read it for you. Goncalves' family statement. The death penalty is merely an illusion in the criminal justice system. When available, it serves as a bargaining tool for the state. And when rarely applied, it's never enforced due to a highly inefficient appellate process. The notion that someone can plead guilty to a crime and still face years of appellate delays reveals a systematic failure. The Latah County Prosecutor's Office's treatment of our family during this process is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. We questioned decisions early in the investigation. Why was the mayor commenting on the case? Why was the coroner speaking to families? Why was an officer with less than 2 years' experience leading the investigation? Why was the University of Idaho involved when they declared it an isolated off-campus incident? Why was the university permitted to write a book about the incident while others were silenced under an overly broad order? As a result, we were branded adversaries. So it was no shock how the Latah County Prosecutor's Office mishandled the plea deal. They vaguely mentioned a possible plea on Friday without seeking our input, and presented the plea on Sunday. Latah County should be ashamed of its prosecutor's office. 4 wonderful young people lost their lives, yet the victims' families were treated as opponents from the outset. We weren't even called about the plea. We received an email with a letter attached. That's how Latah County's prosecutor's office treats murder victims' families. Adding insult to injury, they're rushing the plea, giving families just 1 day to coordinate and appear at the courthouse for a plea on July 2nd. Who do they think they are? After more than 2 years, this is how it concludes, with a secretive deal and a hurried effort to close the case, without any input from the victims' families on the pleas deals. Our family is frustrated right now, and that will subside, and we will come together as always and deal with the reality that we face moving forward. Once again, we thank everyone for their thoughts and prayers. Now, just before I started making this video, There was an interview that popped up with News Nation with Kaylee's father. I haven't had a chance to watch it, but I thought I would add it in here and then comment on it afterwards.
But I wanted you to have your say. I wanted you to be able to say out loud for everyone to hear what this means to you and your family.
This is anything but justice. This is the opposite of our will. There was no majority believing that this was acceptable. I want to honor all the police officers, the FBI, and all the people that work their tail off. The failure is at the court level, 100%. But the men in the boots on the ground and the women that were out there working, I want to honor everything that they did for our children, 100%. The fault is in leadership and the people that you place this evidence upon. They were weak. They decided to play God and decide what this man's decision should be, and not a jury, not a peers, not his peers. They, so that's where we are today.
Walk me through what happened. Brian Enton, did some really great reporting at the top of this show here. But tell me from your perspective how the last 3 days have played out.
I would say ever since Hitler has demanded an independent investigation, they couldn't get away from this case fast enough. They've done everything to make this case go away. So I don't know what that entails, but he said he was going to have an independent investigator. And all of a sudden, we seemed like we were on rails to get rid of this case and make a plea deal. I mean, he's guilty. We all know he's guilty. There's more than enough evidence. But it's tough. It's tough to put a community through this. And it could be bad for reputations and business identities. And there's fallout. But this isn't the will of the victims. This is just one person making a decision, and it doesn't reflect what we were asking for.
Steve, did anybody ever call you from the prosecutor's office to just personally discuss this with you? Did anybody offer to meet with you in person to go over this potential plan?
We have meetings all the time particularly a lot of times on Friday. No. We had this regular meeting that we have to try basically do an update of what's going on, where things are at, because Idaho is actually an amazing state where it really does care about people. We just get one or two, people who just don't care about the victims and don't care about justice. And it's easy to take the weight out. It's easy to make an excuse and say, I'm doing this for the victims, even though I've never interviewed the victims. I've never really talked to them to find out what their true feelings are. So here we are. We're stuck, and we can't get out of it. I asked your audience if anybody knows Judge Hitler, reach out to him and ask him to put his foot down and not accept this offer. It doesn't reflect anything in Idaho. This is not justice. We had an outsider come to our community, kill our kids in their sleep while they're getting a college education, doing everything that they should do, and we don't have the courage to hold him accountable. No plea deal. Let's go for this guy. 100%. Let's do it. And that's how this family stands.
I haven't played the full article because I think that pretty much covers the main part of it. The fact that they weren't given any forewarning. You can see that Steve Goncalves is kind of angry. And he's entitled to be angry. But I also want to point out that we've not heard from the other families yet. And I hope that if there are members in the other families that are happy with this deal, that they won't feel intimidated about speaking out because of one super vocal family. And this is not a criticism of the Goncalves family. It's just a simple statement that sometimes the more peaceful people get left out of the conversation because they feel like their voice doesn't matter. Is it reasonable to ask the judge to reject the plea? There's absolutely nothing in law that says that the judge should reject the plea based on what the victim's families say. You have an agreement that's been reached here. So, my understanding is that the judge has to accept this plea. And here's the thing. Right now, we're all a little bit shocked. Many of us feel that it's possibly not the right decision. But maybe down the track, people will start to see some positives in the situation. I think the families of these young people, their existence for the last more than 2.5 years, has been fighting for justice. And suddenly, the fight's been taken away from them. And they're just in limbo. Where do you go from here? What does your day-to-day life suddenly look like? Because your entire existence has just been ended in terms of how you exist day to day. They have to find a new normal. And I think part of this reaction from them is the realisation that their normal is gone. They need to find that new normal before they can process this situation fully. By now, most of you have probably watched news reports about this, but I'm still going to play a brief clip anyway.
Good afternoon. We have some breaking news here on ABC News Live Reports. I'm Alex Pache in Washington. Right now, we are following news out of Idaho. Bryan Kohberger, accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students in 2022, has accepted a plea deal. ABC News has confirmed that he has agreed to plead guilty to all counts. ABC News Live anchor Kayna Whitworth is on the phone with us. She has been following this case from the beginning. And Kayna, what details can you share with us about how this deal came together?
Yeah, Alex, I mean, this is simply a stunning turn of events in a case that has gripped this entire nation. Up until today, we were looking at an August 18th trial date with Bryan Kohberger's life on the line. What we know now from families who received a letter is that Bryan Kohberger has accepted a plea deal. In part of this plea deal, the defendant will plead guilty to all counts listed in the indictment. So that is 4 counts of murder as well as a burglary count as well. He will serve 4 life sentences consecutively with no possibility of parole. And the defendant will waive all rights to appeal this conviction as well. It also sounds like they will be seeking some restitution for families. This is things like money for funeral expenses, and victims' compensation. The next thing that's happening, Alex, is there will be a change of plea hearing, and that is this Wednesday, July 2nd. And so for some, this may be some finality and some closure. For others, you have to imagine, Alex, there are so many unanswered questions in this case, and I'm sure that there's fear that those questions will remain unanswered. But here we are after more than 2 years, the one and only suspect in the Idaho college murders case, the man who stood accused of murdering Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, and Ethan Chapin. His name is Bryan Kohberger, and he has accepted a plea deal.
I'm just going to read an excerpt from an article from ABC News, which I think clarifies, well, not necessarily clarifies, but it shows the prosecutor's position, and it also shows a little bit of what the family was told. Prosecutors said in the letter to families that the state was approached last week by Kohberger's defence team asking to be presented with an offer. Prosecutors said they then met with available family members last week, weighed the right path forward and made a formal offer to Kohberger. So it is quite possible that the other families may have been in favour of this. We don't know. This resolution is our sincere attempt to seek justice for your family, prosecutors wrote in the letter. This agreement ensures that the defendant will be convicted, will spend the rest of his life in prison, and will not be able to put you and other families through the uncertainty of decades of post-conviction appeals. Your viewpoints weighed heavily in our decision-making process, and we hope that you may come to appreciate why we believe this resolution is in the best interest of justice. Now, I did come across this from KCEW News, which says that the families have made a request to the prosecutors that they delay the hearing that's set for Wednesday to give them more time to travel to Boise. I'm not sure that we're going to see a delay occur, because I think the goal here is to get this resolution, and the families still have. Now, I'm not in America, so I'm just guessing, but I would imagine they would still have sufficient time to be able to book flights to get there. Let me know if that's not the case, though. I can appreciate where they're coming from, but I think in this instance we're probably not going to see the delay occur. So the question still stands, is this justice? Because even for me as an Australian, who used to think that I didn't believe in the death penalty, I had that very Australian outlook of, well, we don't have the death penalty here in Australia. Why do they still have it in the United States? And yet there are two cases that I'm following right now where I find myself in favour of the death penalty. This case and the Madeleine Soto case. But this case, perhaps even more so, because we're talking about 4 lives that were lost. So in some ways, it doesn't feel like justice is being served here, because he gets to live out his life in prison. But then I think we need to unpack it a little bit too, because I think right now we're all in a bit of a state of shock and we're not looking at the bigger picture here. First of all, let's talk about a trial. You are never 100% guaranteed of a guilty verdict in a trial. It just takes one juror who has a different opinion, and that juror may sway other jurors, and suddenly you have a verdict that doesn't go the right way. I'm not sure that I can even put into words the way I really feel, other than that it just doesn't quite sit right with me. But I can see the other side of it too. And there's a part of me that says, no, this isn't a bad thing. So I'm really going to be interested to see what you guys have to say. And maybe things you guys have to say might sway my decision one way or another. So on that note, thanks for listening. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit that like button. And of course, please leave a comment below. Thank you, and I will catch you in the next one.